Everybody. So this first item is a bit of a presentation, but also the board report that's in your pack refers as well. So there'll be a presentation and then some decisions later on following any discussion that we wish to have. Can we just have Stephen sharing slides, please, I think, before we get going too far? Thank you very much, Stephen. That's good. That's in full screen. So I will give you a sort of brief introduction to a strategic prioritisation framework and then pass over to Stephen Bishop, who I'm sure you're very familiar with from STEER, who are helping us out with this piece of work. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about today, first of all, I want to take you through the guiding rationale and the purpose of having a strategic prioritisation framework. Then to talk a bit about the methodology that we propose to employ for the framework, and then lastly on to next steps, and that will link back then to your board paper as well. So in terms of a rationale and a need for a strategic prioritisation framework, we obviously have the strategic investment plan published earlier this year, which sets out a number of schemes, 293, I believe, that we have decided through our technical work are priorities for the South East in order to realise that vision and that ambition set out within our transport strategy. Within that plan, we have phased schemes into the short, medium and longer terms, and we've then worked with all the various delivery partners, National Highways Network, Rail and local authorities to develop what we've called a delivery action plan, which was approved at the last meeting, which gives much more detail on where each scheme is in its delivery cycle, what the next steps are, what needs to happen and so on. So we've got a really good base for schemes by their nature. All of the schemes that are in the strategic investment plan are a priority for the South East, but there are nearly 300 of them, and we do need to recognise that they can't all come forward at the same time. We also need to recognise that funding to support the development of schemes is limited, and as we found out through the delivery action plan, and we knew anyway, interventions are all at various different stages of development. So in a way, we need to prioritise within the priorities that we have already set out. So it's proposed to have a framework to help us to do this, and that framework needs to reflect the current modally based funding landscape in which we'll have to continue to operate, at least in the short term. But the SIP and, sorry, Stephen, if you can go back one more slide. Thank you. The transport strategy and the SIP really set out a much more multimodal ambition. And we also want the framework to be able to respond to that more multimodal funding aspiration that we have. And that includes how we might also prioritise if funding were actually devolved locally. And within that as well, within different levels of funding, we know funding, the fiscal environment is very, very tight at the moment. So this framework needs to be able to do a number of things. On the very side of that slide is that providing advice to ministers on prioritising transport investment, and that is a key function of subnational transport bodies as set out in the guidance that says how we should operate. So as an organisation, we need to build with our partners fundable, deliverable pipelines and demonstrate that TFSE is on the front foot when it comes to supporting onward delivery of schemes. We also need to recognise that we can't always have everything we want, and so there might need to be some tough decisions, and we need to be ready to answer those questions when government ask them of us. So it's really important that we develop a framework and a methodology that will support the board in taking those decisions, and that framework needs to be robust and evidence-led as well. Okay, next slide then please, Stephen. So in terms of sort of decisions that CFC might need to take around prioritisation, there's sort of three main ones. Firstly, in deciding what to focus study money for scheme development on, and that's very something that's pretty much business as usual. We have allocations for helping development of schemes, and that's something that we take as an organisation. But then numbers 2 and 3 are more things that the board needs to be agreed and signed up to in order to provide that advice to government as is requested in the guidance. And that's about getting schemes into specific pipelines for delivery, such as MRN or RIS or the RNet process through rail. And then, really supporting the defining the timing and priority for those as they go right the way through to delivery. So this framework is designed to support you as the board making those decisions, but it's really clear to make it, make out it does not make the decisions for you. That is something that will absolutely rest with you as a board to have that discussion and to come up with those, those actual priority lists. This is just a way of helping you and giving you the information in order to do that. If I pass over now to Stephen, he'll take you through the sort of framework work to date and also where we see it going. Stephen, are yours.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. We've been working with TFSE through the Transport Strategy Working Group and Senior Officers Group for a couple of months now through these steps. We're somewhere between steps 2 and 3, and before we progress in actually developing a tool, we want to get your input and approval. I think in developing any strategic prioritization process, there are a number of questions we need to answer. And if we look under step 1, that includes identifying what role TFSE and this board play in decision making, how that might change over time, what should be the priorities and areas for focus and principles by which prioritization takes place. And potentially the role of scenarios. Sarah's already mentioned that the levels of funding available may change over time, and who gets to make the decisions on the allocation of that funding may change, whether that's central government making those decisions or whether there's decentralized or devolved funding that this board could make, for example. We've then started to draft the structure of the framework. Incorporating those decision-making approaches into the prioritization, and also understanding what analysis we have of all of those different interventions. Sarah's mentioned there's over 250 interventions, all of them at very different stages of development. What is the consistent evidence base against which we can assess all of these interventions fairly? Following today, subject to the outcome of this agenda item, we'll take feedback and then look to develop a prioritization tool and potentially bring that back to the January board. So what are the principles officers and others have told us that they want to have embodied in any prioritization approach or tool? The first is that we must be evidenced. So drawing on what we already have to lend an objective approach to this. The second is it supports decisions, but it doesn't make decisions, as Sarah's already mentioned. That it should be resource efficient and carry forward any existing analysis. Strategic prioritization can be an industry in its own right, and we need this to be an efficient and effective process. And then finally, it should manage uncertainty, and that's already mentioned. That could be around levels of funding, it could be around the extent to which decisions are devolved, it could be around the criteria of a particular funding pot that government is asking for a prioritization. So we've proposed a 4-stage approach to the prioritization framework that we believe is flexible enough to handle those different scenarios or different constraints or rules for different funding pots. The first stage is to organise those nearly 300 schemes, recognising that they're all at different stages of development, and to put them in one of 3 groups: study, such as early stage business case development and feasibility studies; develop, so that's taking schemes through an outline business case through to procurement; and then deliver, so shovels in the ground through to those schemes becoming operational and into monitoring and evaluation. The second is to score them, that is to draw on the existing evidence base that was developed as part of the strategic investment plan and the area study programme that informed those. Then to evaluate the schemes, so what is the overall score, how does that compare to others, and to build in the flexibility then in that evaluation stage that if, for example, government comes to TFSE and its partners to say what are the priorities for a second round of funding for the major road network, the tool has that flexibility that we can ask those questions and then bring information to the board to make those decisions. And then the final stage is to finalise those prioritised lists or action plans, and it may be necessary to then reevaluate to apply additional criteria. We talked a little bit about scenarios already. The two that we're considering are based on levels of funding. That's the y-axis, red arrow. We're looking at 3 different levels of funding, one based on an average of historic spend over the past decade, and then a higher funding scenario, which seems a bit distant at the moment, but one of 2% per year increase, and one of a -2% from that. We're also aware that the organisation that TFSE is today and how decisions get made may vary over time. And so we've also considered a set of scenarios for a greater level of decentralised or devolved decision making. So to those 4 stages, the first is organise. I've mentioned that certain schemes may have been referenced in the area studies programme and strategic investment plan for the first time. Those schemes will typically need to go through feasibility studies and early stage business case, then into what we're calling development. This is the point at which development costs could be capitalised and not so reliant on resource funding, and that will take the scheme through outline business case, through into any powers or permissions that are required, through to procurement and a full business case, and then into delivery, so shovels into the ground. We've then identified where each of those schemes are and what then might happen in each 5-year window from now to 2050 to progress the scheme through to delivery. The second stage is the scoring. This approach is broadly something that the Department for Transport and Treasury would recognise. We've condensed the 5 cases of a Green Book compliant business case into 4 cases here. The strategic and economic cases really providing the rationale for why the scheme is important. And then how fundable or affordable the scheme is. So based on present levels of funding, the total cost of the scheme, likely funding sources, and then implementation. What is the technical or engineering feasibility of the scheme? This information we already have, as I've mentioned. It's from the area studies programme. It's from the multi-criteria assessment framework that was developed then. Every scheme has been through a considerable amount of due diligence and review from the officers from all of the 16 local transport authorities, as well as from National Highways and Network Rail. And whilst it is a more qualitative assessment, it is the only consistent assessment we have across all nearly 300 interventions. So after scoring, we look to evaluate. So subject to the criteria that are related to any funding decision. So for example, it could be a central government funding pot that is only for the major road network, the strategic road network, perhaps the rail network, perhaps for schemes of a certain value or size, or certain schemes to achieve particular outcomes or objectives. The tool will be able to add to that those criteria or those constraints along with the score to identify at what stage each scheme should be at in 5-year windows. So I move to the next slide, just a bit of sorry, I'll come on to that in a second, but then also to look at the funding constraints as well. So at the moment, the only funding constraints are those scenarios that we've considered, looking at historic spend and then a plus and a minus scenario on those. The numbers in this table are entirely illustrative and not based on our current assessment, but obviously we can all appreciate that funding will be a major constraint on our ability to drive the strategic investment plan forward. So here's a little bit of the example. So here we have 5 schemes from the SIP, and again only illustrative, but based on their current stage of development, based on their score from the technical assessment, based on how the cost of the scheme and the funding constraints, and based on how deliverable we believe that scheme to be, a prioritisation will take place to develop an action plan. And for each of the schemes, it will identify in each 5-year window whether that scheme should be put forward to study, to develop or deliver, and also recognises that some larger schemes may need multiple 5-year windows to develop. And for some smaller schemes, those schemes may be able to pass through the study and development stage reasonably quickly within a single 5-year window. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the methodology through the organising, the scoring, the evaluating and the development of action plans, and as well as consideration of scenarios, but I'll pass back to Sarah.
Thanks very much, Stephen. And obviously we're quite happy to take any questions or comments that the board may have. Just before that, in terms of next steps, the board paper has a recommendation where we're asking the board to endorse the methodology and also to agree to the further development of the tool, which will happen in conjunction with Transport Strategy Working Group and the Senior Officer Group, with a view then to bringing that tool to the January 2024 Partnership Board for review and then subsequent approval, so that it can then be used to generate any such priority lists as we might be asked to do so by largely the Department for Transport.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Stephen. Questions, comments as we go into this? It's a fairly complex situation, but an awful lot of work gone into it, and the papers set out a way forward. Has anyone got any questions or comments that they want to make?
Keith, Rob Humby, if I may. Sorry, I should have put my hand up. Beg your pardon. Is that okay?
Yes,
just in terms of understanding a lot of work's gone into it, and there's clearly will be, this is the process. So once we get down to sort of getting down to individual schemes, I suppose, or priorities, there's clearly still a lot of work to do with the officer team as well. And then once we get to that stage, presumably there's to be, I was trying to pick that up, Stephen's report, in terms of sort of how much testing of that will take place. In other words, to make sure they are absolutely the right schemes to go forward. Because if money's going to be limited, we need to make very clear that what we put forward is deliverable and the right schemes. That's a bit, it's a bit obvious, but it doesn't always happen, if I put it like that.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. Should we go to? I'll take Daniel and Jeff, and then we'll get some response. Daniel, please.
Thank you. Along a similar line, actually. Thanks, Rob. Question is, so 3 questions. I'll just splurge them out. One is schemes within a 5-year window. Is that kind of 5-year control periods, or is it a rolling 5-year window? That's a detail. Next one is, are we being smart and trying to make sure that this portfolio of schemes as a whole is not going down the same strategy and planning route that schemes have done in decades past, recognizing that we do have less money and we need to deliver better for less, and the world is changing in terms of remote working, and the world is changing in terms of increasing number of modes of integrated transport. So the whole world is changing. Are we confident that this process, the framework, is supporting all those changes?
Thank you. I'll come to Jeff, and then we'll get some answers, and then we'll go again if there's more questions. Yeah. Jeff.
Thanks. My point is just the simple one, is that over my career in transport and transport planning, I've always been surprised at how often a new subject for support comes in from the right field, the left field, elsewhere, as government tries to seek its own pet projects or its own priorities quickly. And I think that it's great, everything that you're writing down, Stephen, and that sort of thing, but you've got to stay tuned to the mood music that's coming out of the Treasury and the Department for Transport, and be ready to respond to what they want rather than just what we want.
Fine, and I'll just add, I mean, I think adaptable and adoptable is something that we just need to think about. But Sarah, do you want to come to you or to Stephen? How do you want to go?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to go in first and let Stephen come in to add anything as well. So, Councillor Humby, your question in terms of deliverable, I think we're very aware that it has to be a deliverable pipeline. I think for our credibility as an organisation, it has to be a deliverable pipeline. So yeah, that is absolutely something that is there. There's the big question, sort of linking in with Jeff's comments around being, there's left field requests, if you like, around needing to adapt to a changing world, needing to adapt to differing funding levels. A question we're grappling with through this is, if we categorise everything and we end up with a list of 1 to 300 and there's X amount of funding available, then we can go draw a line and say, well, there we go, the top 20 are the ones we can do. But if there's only half of X funding available, does that mean we draw the line higher up, or does it actually mean that those priorities are very different because we're looking for maybe cheaper, quicker wins in that different funding environment? So I think it's not just a question of how much funding is available; it's that how the funding is available as well. So that is something we're trying to bring into. And Daniel, coming to your points, yeah, I think that links in there as well, as to it isn't just an amount of schemes we can bring forward, but it's the types of schemes. The 5-year windows are currently in line with the transport strategy, so 2020 to 25, 25 to 30 don't necessarily match up. They match up with some of the other control periods or RIDS periods, ROSE periods, but not necessarily at the moment, although that is something maybe we should consider. Stephen, was there anything you wanted to add to those?
Just a couple of smaller things. Just on the testing point, is obviously we're testing for deliverability, but we're testing it in the sense of sort of peer review from officers, that if we ask some exam questions of the framework, what outputs does it come up with, what action plans does it suggest, and are those credible locally? And I think, Daniel, you also had a question about kind of almost how do we learn the lessons and how do we adapt as the world changes around us. We very much want to link this to monitoring and evaluation work, and you'll remember the State of the Region report that has come to a previous board meeting, and so if, for example, we see that we're not decarbonising the way we travel quickly enough, or there are various technological innovations that are changing the way we travel, that we have the flexibility within this tool to prioritise or deprioritise different criteria or add new criteria in, so that we can then reassess the priorities for delivery. And I think that talks, Jeff, to your point as well about how government priorities change or funding levels change. And this goes back to the whole premise that I think Sarah mentioned from the outset, that this is decision informing and not decision making, and it needs to be flexible and it needs to be efficient. We can't spend months at a time conducting a prioritisation exercise if we have to move in a matter of weeks to respond to a changing government policy.
Chair, if I may come back on that, part of my questioning was because I see what we're doing in TFSE as a bit of an overlay, and therefore we have a big challenge of making sure that everything we do integrates or interfaces at least with what's going on in all the other authorities that have responsibilities in this space. And we don't want to be duplicating, we want to be complementing. It's very challenging, I appreciate that. And also appreciate that we can't see the criteria that you're using within the framework yet, but hopefully those criteria answer my question, which is how do we make sure that we are complementing and enhancing rather than duplicating and not necessarily enriching. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Thank you.
I got Rupert and then Dan to follow. Rupert first, then Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just this reiteration, this is a tool to help your decision making. Ultimately, the decision making is made by you as the board, and this is another tool in the toolbox, if you like, to help you make it. And I think if you agree to allow us to proceed to develop this, then some of the questions I think that you're asking will be made clear at the January board before you make the decision on whether the tool is acceptable. Just on the point that Daniel has raised, I mean, do make a really interesting point. I think for both road and rail, there's a strong argument to say that the decisions that you as a board make in terms of priorities for the region should be the ones that inform control period, RNEP, RIS. And if you take RIS, for example, if you go back to RIS 1, it was done to us. RIS 2 was a little bit more engaging. RIS 3 is showing signs of being more collaborative. And actually, if you play that out to RIS 4, you would like to see something about being co-created with National Highways. And so there's a strong argument, the evidence base that we provide and the decision making that you make goes into form the investment priorities that are set out with those authorities. But I just reiterate the point, this is a tool to help you in the decision making. And Chairman, when you've gone to Dan, it might be helpful for the board to hear from Sarah about some of the schemes that you have prioritised previously that have recently secured funding.
Thank you. Daniel, Dan, sorry, welcome.
Yeah, I thought it might be just useful to give a sort of brief DFT perspective on this. I mean, first of all, thanks Sarah and Stephen and also Rupert's colleagues' comments lastly just for that. I think really useful. I think just in general terms, really supportive of the approach you've taken. It shows a really sort of good sense of taking a strategic approach and of doing exactly what we need TFSE to do. That's to be able to balance different priorities and to focus on where the greatest benefits lie for the region and to sort of help us work with you on that basis. So I think a really sort of sound approach and really supportive of the approach you've taken. Really just to reiterate points that I think essentially have already been made. I think the main one is just to build in that level of flexibility that enables you to factor in sort of bigger picture factors that will come in. There will be changes in economic situations. There will be changes in political priorities. There will be a number of things. I think we all know that. And building a tool that builds that in, that flexibility in, I think will be really helpful. And as part of that, sort of not trying to over-engineer it, I think is just one of those things as to the sort of level of specificity that you can get about exactly the level of analysis. So it's getting it to that level where you're confident of sort of prioritization, but not perhaps pursuing something down the too far down the track. But as an approach, I think it'd really support it, and as I say, building in that flexibility so that you are then able to respond and to reflect changes that are likely to come. I think it would be a really good part of that. But it sounds like a really good good way to take things forward.
Excellent, thank you. Sarah, did you want to just highlight one or two of those things?
Yes. So on Friday afternoon at about 3:30. So apologies for not having got too much comms out about it at the moment. But we had very good news from DFT, the Major Road Network team. Let us know that 3 of the schemes that the board previously prioritised back in 2019, even it might have been now, had actually been approved at their SOBC stage, so strategic outline business case, and are therefore moving forward to develop their outline business cases. So yeah, that's a real example of 3 schemes. The 3 are the A31 at Farnham, the A229 Bluebell Hill, and then also Northern Rail Bridge as well. So that's really good news. I know they are schemes that have had their business cases in with the department for quite some time, but a real example of where the board made those tough decisions, provided the department with a top 10 list, and as a result, there's been many schemes that have received approval over those years, but 3 in particular last Friday, which is obviously very much welcomed.
Well done, thank you. Any other points or comments? No. We're asked to endorse the framework methodology to support the prioritisation of decisions and to agree to the development of the tool to aid that process, and it'll come back in January. Are we happy to agree that?
Yeah. Yes.
Agreed, yeah.
Excellent. We come on to agenda item 6, and I hope Joy's there. I've seen her somewhere. So, if I can hand over to Councillor Dennis to introduce and the Audit and Governance Committee update, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon all. I can see it's a long agenda today, so I won't go into a tremendous amount of detail because I believe the paper actually draws out the salient points. But I probably would just draw to your attention a number of them anyway, just in case you haven't had a chance to read all the papers. And this comes from our last meeting of the 12th of October, so fairly recently we had our last Audit and Governance Committee meeting. I just want to highlight, obviously I was appointed as chair, that's probably why I'm speaking, so it's fairly obvious, but I also want we welcome some new members, Councillor Mutin, Councillor Lucas and Daniel Ritz from the LEP. just to draw out the fact we did go through the terms of reference. We reviewed the terms of reference and the work programme for the next 12 months. And we particularly looked at point 5, something we draw to the officer's attention was point 5, number 5, which is about how TFSC secure value for money particularly through the procurement activity. Something we don't normally see on audit governance. I think it's because we don't have a finance committee that this is attached to it. So we particularly wanted to have a look, and the officers are going to come back and report to us for the next meeting. I think that's quite useful. We also then went through the finance report. We reviewed this and looked at the revised budget. That really is in line with the fact that we have a reduced funding from the government that came through of around about 15%. The main consequences being that the Centre of Excellence work is being rolled over into next year. We obviously, it was a healthy discussion also about the local contribution rates, and we decided to retain them as they currently are, given particularly the state of supposed state of many councils' financial funding. So we've kept those consistent and steady for this year. The next sort of item that was on there, a very important item, the risk register was reviewed, and there were some significant items on there, and they are highlighted in the report. We also asked for a new risk to be created about the potential impacts of the current fertility with government priorities and policies. And that was particularly important, but also we tasked the officers to provide a report on the inflation impact on schemes and how this is affecting local authorities. It's something that I had noticed, and the others there on that meeting had noted too, and we think it's particularly important. Then we went on to a very detailed conversation, a lot of papers on the recommended proposals for the future, the Transport Forum. And I know that we've got this coming up next in the next item, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I'm sure this might there might be a discussion around this in the next item. But just to say, we did endorse the recommendation, and I think that when you see item 7, that you will hopefully agree with us as well. But that certainly was our recommendation with the members on the audit committee. So without further ado, I just want to ask you to recommend to note our discussions and actions arising at the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on the paper? No. Well, thank you, Joy. I can't see any hands going up. So are we happy to approve the recommendation as printed? Nobody objecting, so I take that as a definite yes then. Thank you. And thank you again for your report. We come to agenda item 7, which is the Transport Forum review. And Rupert, are you going to introduce this, please?
I will. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Dennis, for leading into this one. As members will be aware, we've been reviewing the operation of the Transport Forum. And, you know, it's fair to say that the Transport Forum has been an integral part of our constitution and how we operate since Transport for the South East's inception. And certainly there's huge value in the work that the Transport Forum undertake, ably chaired by Jeff French. But of course, since 2017, the numbers on the Transport Forum and the stakeholders that got involved with Transport for the South East has significantly increased. And the reason for the review was principally because membership has expanded quite significantly over the last few years. And we recognise that's quite challenging to manage and ensure that all of the stakeholder views are taken into account. And then I coupled with the fact that a number of thematic groups have been established to support some of the technical work streams. So, for example, future mobility or freight. The sort of combination of expanding Transport Forum, increasing number of stakeholders, plus the fact that we put in place a number of thematic groups led to an opportune moment to review the operation of the Transport Forum. So in short, 3 options were considered. Transport Forum were taken through the options. We had a really good engagement session with them. We also provided an opportunity for them to feedback in written form, and we've taken account of the comments from Transport Forum members and stakeholders, and land on a proposal which means that the Transport Forum meets twice a year, but that an advisory panel is formed that pulls the chairs of the relevant thematic groups into a single place, and provides a bit more of a focused approach to advice into the board. So there's still a mechanism for the chair of that advisory panel to feed back to the board, and they will maintain their membership there, and they will also chair the Transport Forum. But the advisory panel enables us to ensure that the many voices out there can be heard in some shape or form, either through one of the thematic groups or through the Transport Forum. And that helps us manage the sort of scale of the stakeholder interest, and really ensure that the board get really good quality advice from the forum and the advisory panel. We also are supplementing that with a programme of digital engagement to help support that sort of communication with stakeholders, and certainly feedback from the engagement and consultation work that we did is they are very keen to have that. So in essence, 3 elements: a Transport Forum that continues to meet twice a year, it's quite a broad membership, and then advisory panel that consists of the chairs of the various thematic groups, that enables us to provide feedback into the partnership board, and then a third element which is around the digital engagement piece, to ensure that all stakeholders can have a voice. So within your papers, there are a suite of appendices that take you through the steps that we went through, take you through the comments that we had from stakeholders. There is it looks rather complicated, but there's a sort of family tree in there, which sets out how it will work in relation to the board. So those thematic chairs plus the Transport Forum feed into the advisory panel. The chair of the advisory panel, which is currently Jeff, is the seat on the board to provide you advice from the Transport Forum and the advisory panels. So hopefully, Chairman, with the combination of the papers and my explanation, and I know you've seen this a number of times, we're seeking agreement from the board to evolve the Transport Forum in this particular way. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the explanation. It's very good. Are there any other points that anyone want to raise? No, we're getting on really well this afternoon.
Keith, sorry, it's Rob again. I just want to say, I think we all want to acknowledge, I mean, apart from the chairman, of course, Jeff, I know, it is an excellent forum, and I think we should all, recognise the work that it's done and the value that it brings to us overall. I think bringing in all those strategic partners is invaluable, and as you know, my term of joining up the dots, it certainly does that. And I think, Jeff, well done to you and for doing that and the work that it's doing, and absolutely endorse what we're doing and the review. So I think excellent work. I think it's benefited us long term, I think, as well.
Well done, and thank you for that, Rob. Absolutely right. I just think we do. It's right that we review, and it's also right to acknowledge the amount of work that's gone on, the amount of people that are now interested in having a voice through Transport for the South East, which again can only be good for all of us. So well done to all of you. So we had the recommendation on the screen a few moments ago. So happy to agree that as printed. Yep. Well done. Thank you very much. So we now come to I'll call it Jeff's view. Jeff, Transport for an update, please.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you very much, Keith. Yeah, the Transport Forum has had 2 meetings that we just bring to people's attention. And we had a meeting, a virtual meeting back on the 4th of September. About 22 members of the forum attended. The big items were regional active travel strategy and the state of the region report. And the forum were introduced to the purpose behind commissioning the regional active travel strategy, and the forum heard how and who we will engage with to develop that strategy. The timescales, programme and stages of work were also outlined. Forum members discussed the presentation and queried when and how some groups will be engaged with within the process. And the forum were also introduced to the State of the Region report and key information contained within the report on economy, society and environment. So that was the last sort of meeting of the Transport Forum in its previous format. Since then, we had a second meeting on Thursday, the 19th of October, which was attended by 15 members of the forum. And it was an extraordinary meeting to inform the forum of the Audit and Governance Committee's recommendations for the future operation of the Transport Forum. Too many tongue twisters in this. The Transport Forum members endorsed the recommended proposal for the future operation of the meetings. There was a bit of very understandable discussion about the practicality of holding in-person meetings instead of virtual meetings were noted, as well as whether hybrid meeting options should be considered. This is the 2 meetings a year. We definitely appreciate that any location for an in-person meeting will be central and well connected. So that would make you think of places like Gatwick, places which have got good transport links. But that's what we will start off with, but we will keep the format of the meetings under review in case we have to step back to some sort of hybrid session. But we would certainly want to get those people that are keen to meet face to face, giving them that ability. So I've got just the feedback on the recommendation for the future operation of the Transport Forum. As the work of TFSE has grown and the stakeholder groups have expanded, the forum's view is it's only right for the role of the Transport Forum to also evolve. The recommended proposal for the operation of the forum best reflects all of the feedback received, whilst also reducing the risk of stakeholder fatigue. It hopefully ensures the Transport Forum remains effective, both in making the best use of members' time and knowledge, and ensuring that it best supports the work of the organisation. And it will also allow members to still be kept informed of the work of TFSE and expand their learning and understanding of the different aspects of the transport sector, which of course may be outside their own expertise at that stage. So we were delighted with that Joy and the Audit and Governance Committee gave it a unanimous welcome. We're keen to get moving forward on it, but we will also be self-critical to make sure it's working as well as is possible. I think that's all. You're on mute. Yeah.
That was wasted then, wasn't it? I just said thank you, Jeff. but genuinely, I mean that. And apologies, I should know about turning the mute off now. It's right and proper that we get the best attendance we can. My only, if you can, and those of you can remember when we firstly tried a hybrid meeting where because everyone wanted to come back together, and 4 of us went down to Brighton and the rest of them or the rest of you joined online, and I'm sure there are very good reasons for you joining online, but listen, that's no reason for not trying it. What I'm just saying is it's got to work for as many people as we possibly can, because the more voice we get, the more chance we've got of getting things right. So thank you for that. Are there any other comments or suggestions or?
Yeah,
Councillor Humby.
No, I actually put my hand up this time.
I couldn't believe it, which is why you got called.
Always double. Couple of bits. Interested, I think it was noted, Jeff, about the parish councils and town councils involvement. I think it was noted that it was, regionally sort of strategic, but who knows in the future? And I think it is an immense source of local knowledge, and just to have that there again, even if it's not right now, but to engage with them now early on, I think it's advantage. And also, I think it was commented about that sort of cross-boundary engagement. Yeah. Well, clearly that's something you're looking at, and that's absolutely vital, isn't it? There are no lines across the road, but in terms of that, we need to make sure that we always talking to further afield and wider than just our group, if you want to put it like that. Yeah. Thanks, Kate. I'll put my hand down now, mate.
Absolutely right. No other questions or comments? Thank you for that. Then, so we're asked to note the recent meeting of the Transport Forum and note and consider comments that were made. So I'm happy to do that. Well done. Thank you. So we now come on to agenda item 9, which is the policy position statement. And Sarah, I think you're going to introduce this as well, please.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So yes, these policy position statements is something that has been provided updates to the board on as they have been developed. But we're now at the point where we have all 7 of them finished and ready to go, subject obviously to your approval this afternoon. So these policy position statements were born out of a recognition that whilst we have the delivery action plan, which helps us deliver schemes within the strategic investment plan, that the strategic investment plan also contains a number of policy interventions that we would like to see delivered to help realise the vision set out in the strategy, and that we also therefore need to have an action plan, if you like, for the actions to be taken to help deliver those policies. Also, the area studies and the strategic investment plan have a huge number of supporting technical documents, and it was felt that if we could condense those actions in those policies into a more easy to read format, then they would also provide the function of a better communication tool as to what it is that TFSE wants to see. So 7 policy position statements have been prepared. They're on a number of topics. Firstly, active travel and micromobility, transport decarbonisation, transport and social inclusion, future of rural transport, bus, shared mobility and mass transit, rail, and then highways as well. And all the policy positions are available in Appendix 1 to the report. They all follow the same format, set out the context of the issues relating to each theme, and then how the TFSE work then feeds into that, and explaining what actions TFSE, working collectively with their partners, will take to deliver therefore that 2050 vision. They've drawn very much on the thematic plans that were started off life as part of the area studies, and then those themes also being brought through to the SIP. So there's nothing particularly new about them. It's just a slightly different way of presenting that same information. Since the board papers were sent out, we have had representation from one of our authorities around the wording of one of the actions within the highways thematic plan, and particularly around the use of the phrase road space reallocation. So having discussed that in detail with officers involved, it's my proposal, subject to you agreeing, that the highways policy position statement action 3 is slightly amended from the version that's in there to remove the specific reference to road space reallocation. Get my words out. It doesn't particularly change the emphasis of the action. It just removes that wording, which I think perhaps over the last few months has become a bit more of a sensitive issue than it might have been when we first started drafting these. So I think the intent behind the action is still there. It just makes it a little less harsh, if you like, on that particular issue, and says that it's about us supporting authorities who want to deliver those multimodal solutions. We're not in any way insisting that those things should happen if that's not right for the local area. So I think it gives that flexibility. That was all I wanted to say in introduction to the policy position statements, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. And any questions or comments? Daniel.
So this is an ignorant question, but and apologise if it's treading on something sensitive. I may have missed the inferences, but could you expand a bit more on what circumstances, in what circumstances, road space reallocation might not be desirable? And I'm generally not trying to provoke poker beast here.
No. No, I think it is probably quite hard to give you a specific example. I think what we were wanting to avoid and what some of our constituent authorities were raising with us was that they shouldn't feel forced into having to do road space reallocation away from car drivers towards bus and mass transit if that were not the right thing for their specific location. So I think it's where authorities have decided that is the right thing to do, then we are there to provide advice and share best practice, but we're not there to impose that they must do it if they have decided it's not right for them at this current time.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Joy.
Sorry, I was just finding the right policy statement. I was trying to work out where I could bring this particular item in, and I wondered if this was the item, this was the spot. And really it's in relation to DFT Circular 122.
Shall we deal with that under any other business?
Oh, right, okay.
Well, because I think
sorry. I have a second question, and I'm not
Go on.
quite sure whether this also is in this particular piece, and this is to do with the rail timetable changes. Do you want me to bring that up under AOB as well?
I can't see how you'll link it in. Well, I suppose you could in rail generally.
I could it in a way. Don't worry, I'll do it on AOB then.
Thank you very much. We discussed the earlier one earlier, so that's good. Okay, Tim.
Thank you. I welcome the decarbonisation statement in particular, but decarbonisation is not the only environmental issue of importance, and particularly with the way that policy development is moving. For example, the government has recently accepted an amendment to the LURB bill to strengthen the duty on public bodies to have regard to the purposes of national parks, which will require them instead to seek to further those purposes. That's an amendment to the Environment Act 1995, section 62. Of course, the environment is already, as I understand it, part of the SIP Strategic Investment Plan objectives, and will doubtless be pursued anyway, but we would have preferred, I say that for the Southlands National Park, but I trust also for other protected landscapes, to see a rather broader focus on the environment, and we're a bit disappointed that it was not drawn in that way. Now, I have no desire to hold up a statement on decarbonisation, which would, I think, give quite the wrong signal. But the question remains as to how the many other important environmental issues which arise from the development of the transport infrastructure and the like going forward, how that is to reflect the growing priority it will have to have in the consideration of public bodies in the light of developments in policy, and specifically the stronger duty to further the purposes of the national parks.
Tim, I'll have a first stab at it, and I'm sure Rupert will come in. I think you answered your own question. Those responsibilities sit on the statutory organisations, and that's not what we are. I mean, we have to have obviously take into account all of the environmental issues that are relevant to infrastructure, but the duty to cooperate sits, and we clearly do cooperate. In my opinion, still sits with the main bodies. So, Rupert, I'll let you dig me out of this hole now.
No, it's fine. I mean, Tim, you make a really important point, actually, and it's something that we've ummed and ahed on as we've sort of gone down this policy position approach. And I think you're absolutely right in that there's a legislative framework which puts positive obligations on local transport authorities, Network Rail, national highways, around having to have regard to protected landscapes, both landscape designation and environmental designation. And I think we didn't want to sort of develop a policy where there's an overarching legislative requirement for people to have regard. And I think what has sort of strengthened my view on whether we do this or not are things like the biodiversity net gain requirements in relation to new development, which I think are really positive, albeit being slightly delayed by government, but nonetheless, the intention is that they will be brought in. And so I think we've got enough signposts in both the strategy and the SIP, and you've got this overarching government, legislative and policy framework that means that we put our focus on the areas of policy from the SIP that we think are relevant, if that makes sense. So it is I think the point you make is a really important one, and I think there are protections, legislative and from a national policy perspective, which makes sure that feet can be held to the fire around new development.
Dan.
Basically, I was going to make one wider point, but just while I've got the mic, just to come back on the point that Sarah was making about the change in language that you've chosen to make, Sarah. I mean, I think just to say, I think I can see why you've made that change, and I think this sort of goes back to it is sometimes sensible just to reflect on language and just to check in whether you feel you can achieve the outcome you want to achieve. But perhaps in language which is more in keeping with how things may have shifted. So everyone will have noted there has been a shift in some of the narrative with some of the things the department has announced, such as the plan for drivers. Now, it's not to say that there's been a major policy shift, but some of the language changes can then sort of jar a little bit. So I think I think it's quite a sensible thing just to look at that. You're still the same sort of outcomes, but as most you'll appreciate, the sort of narrative around plan for drivers is just ensuring that there's sort of choice available rather than it seeming to be a sort of enforced shift in a certain direction. So I can see why you've chose to make that. I mean, these are your policy statements, not DFT, so I'm not going to overly comment on the content, but I think that's just where you can achieve the right outcome, but just sensitive to the language, I think is a sensible approach. My slightly wider point was just, and I'm sure you probably are doing this anyway, but was just in terms of working with other subnational transport bodies, many of whom I think would have sort of very similar priorities. You didn't necessarily need to articulate them in the statements themselves, but things like future rural transport, for example, I know is something that a number of STBs are interested in, Transport East in particular. So just to sort of whether you articulate it in the text itself or just whether behind the scenes you just ensure that you're making those link ups to make sure that all the sort of synergies are made, I think just makes it even stronger.
Thank you, Dan. Tim,
Yes, thanks. Just to come back on your response and Rupert's to what I was saying, as I say, I'm not in any way trying to slow down the decarbonisation statement, which would be a mistake. But I think there does remain, and there will be recurring instances where environmental and transport infrastructure do come into conflict. I could name current examples. And I personally think, and I think the National Park thinks, that the position of the Transport South East could be more explicit, shall we say, and in ways which would help the resolution of some of these issues as they arise. One thinks of Arundel bypass or Junction 9 on the M3 and so on. But these tensions will go on arising, and as we both develop our respective roles. But could I mention one other quite smaller point? I noticed that in a couple of places in different policy statements, the future of rural transport statement and the active travel and micromobility statement, there are references to measures to promote active travel and the like, and of course we support that. But a couple of stray references to footpaths and the like being well lit in rural areas. I just wanted to mention that we're not alone as a national park in having a dark night skies policy. We have 2,000 miles of rights of way in the national park, and no one is suggesting that all of those should be illuminated, but we do have guidance on how illumination, where necessary, can be done in a way which does least prejudice to the dark night skies objective, which is closely linked, obviously, to our nature conservation role. So I just put up a marker on that. We wouldn't want to see, as it were, an unlimited expansion of rural lighting on this or any other account.
Thank you, Tim. Rupert.
Yeah, thanks. It's an important discussion, this, I think. I think the role of Transport for the South East in relation to the landscape aspects that you described, Tim, is, at best it's signposting people to the legislation and the policy framework. I think it is the applicants or the developers that need to have regard to the landscape, and I think we just need to be mindful that Transport for the South East isn't a delivery body. I mean, that might be something that the government wanted in the future, who knows, but we're not a delivery body. It's very much local transport authorities or national highways or rail, and they have to have in law the regard that you've mentioned. They have that positive obligation. So our role is about, I don't think it'd be right for us to have a policy statement in place that sets out the obligations of the statutory obligations for delivery bodies, and I suppose in a similar vein on dark skies policy, again, something certainly a number of authorities in national parks and would support the dark skies policy. I think it's very much again for local transport authorities to have regard to that. So Saturn's local plan, for example, a management plan, sets out really clearly the dark skies policy that local transport authorities should be having regard to. And as you rightly say, there should be, lighting in rural areas should be for good reason, rather than just as a matter of course. And I think this is something that we'll continue discussions with the officer group, and we'll make sure that the points you make here are reflected so that everybody is alive to the fact that they have obligations, particularly in relation to landscape protected areas, but also the point you make about dark skies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, is there anything you want to add, or should we?
No, thank you, Chair. That's fine for me just to move to the recommendation, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. We have the recommendation there that, with the amendment suggested, that we recommend to approve the 7 policy position statements. Are we happy to do that? Thank you. Well done.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, they will now move to being published on our website in due course.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to 10, the finance update. And Sarah, I think I see you again, please.
It is. I seem to be having a busy afternoon, don't I?
You do. Well done.
So thank you. Yes, and this is the finance report, which does a number of things. So firstly, it provides an update on grant funding from the Department for Transport. It then, as a result of that, which was less than we had anticipated at the time of the last board meeting when you agreed a budget for this year, it then therefore asked the board to agree a revised budget based on that reduced level of funding, and then moves on to note the current position at the end of Q2, and then lastly to discuss the local contributions proposed for 2024-25. As Councillor Dennis said in her update, this report was taken through the Audit and Governance Committee, and they have agreed to that it should be recommended to the board. So firstly, on the grant funding, shortly after the last board meeting, actually, we did receive notification from the Department for Transport that the amount of grant funding we've received for this year was actually less than had been anticipated. We had anticipated £2.065 million worth of funding, and we were awarded of £1.725 million worth of funding. So whilst obviously we are continuing to be grateful for the funding from DFT, it was very disappointing that we hadn't got the amount that had been indicated to us. And therefore it does mean that we're not fully able to deliver the agreed business plan for this year. We've had ongoing discussions internally and externally, and we've agreed that we don't need to submit a revised business plan, we just need to submit a revised budget to DFT once you have agreed it at the board. So the implications of that reduction in funding were as follows. Some of that reduction was able to be absorbed due to delays in recruiting staff to the vacant positions. However, we have had to look at the technical programme and carried out a reprofiling of the development of the Regional Centre of Excellence. That work will still get underway, but just not as much of it this financial year as we had first envisaged. And also needing to look at less support for development of schemes through the strategic investment plan as well. So as a result, we've only been able to offer support, that early stage scheme development support, to 4 authorities for different schemes, where we had hoped to do more. So a revised budget based on that lower level of funding was developed, as I said, was taken through the Audit and Governance Committee, and they have recommended that the board agree to the revised budget, which is set out in appendix to the plan, to the report, sorry, along with also a comparison of what the change has been. So that's appendix 2 in your report. Do you want to seek approval of that report, that budget first, before I move on to reporting against it?
Quite happy to do that. Are there any questions or comments with regards to the first 2 points? No. So I take it we've approved as printed. Yep. Good. Carry on, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So Appendix 3 in the report then sets out the position to the end of September 2023 against the revised budget, and it also sets out the current forecast to the end of the financial year, which unsurprisingly, given the two have happened together, is the same as the proposed budget for the year as well. So the total spend to date is just under 925,000, with just over £400,000 of that on the technical programme. The main elements of expenditure to date relate to delivering the technical programme, including delivery of the strategic investment plan, developing the analytical framework, thematic studies and staffing costs. Now, it might seem that that 400,000 for 6 months through the year is quite a low spend compared to what's forecast, but that spend has been slower because of needing to get the technical call-off contract up and running. And now that contract is in place, we have a lot of technical work that's being commissioned, and it's therefore anticipated that the rate of spend will increase significantly as we go through that. In terms of local contributions for 2024-25, as Councillor Dennis reported in her report, the Audit and Governance Committee did discuss this, and given the current financial constraints, it's not proposed that those contributions change from what they have been. So £58,000 for county authorities and £30,000 for unitary authorities. It is really important, and I think DFT will probably agree that we do make those contributions, and they do stand us in good stead with DFT. So it is proposed they do remain, but they are held at a flat rate compared to previous financial years. That will bring us in 498,000, which makes a really important contribution towards our staffing costs. So a full budget proposal and accompanying draft business plan will then be drawn up over the next few months and presented to the Partnership Board for consideration in January 2024. Happy to take any questions. Otherwise, there are the 2 recommendations around noting the financial position and agreeing for local contributions.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Councillor Humby.
Yeah, Keith, just a comment really in terms of, I suppose, a concern with the reduced level of government funding, that being aware of the potential impact on the SIP. And it's just sort of us for noting, just to understand what that potentially could mean, really. It's just so that we put up on our, it's a bit obvious really, one of those other things, but we clearly need to be aware, don't we?
No, absolutely, and we need to have contingencies or a different approach in place. We've done it so far, but you're absolutely right. And I mean, just on the funding and the contributions from us or from the constituent bodies.
Yeah.
From my perspective, we just have to continue to show value for money for that, because I'm sure that all the time we are producing the goods as we are. Then I think that the majority of, well, I hope the entire contributors will think their money is well spent. So I think it is, and so well done on that front.
Yeah.
Rupert.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I think there are 4 things that are really important for us and our local transport authorities. One is revenue funding to allow schemes to be developed, and that's been a bit of a perennial problem for authorities. You know, particularly when the call comes for projects, you need that revenue stream in order to get stuff on the shelf and through the various approval processes. And I think the way in which you've prioritised as a board has meant that we've had some success with that, but you're going to need more revenue funding to bring things forward. I think the second thing is around early settlement, early grant settlement. So one of the challenges you know we have faced is that the grant settlement, or perhaps the quantum rather than the actual payment, isn't necessarily known until we're into the year. And so we're having conversations with the department now about making sure that we have early settlement. So ideally, at your 29th of January board meeting, we'll be able to tell you what the settlement is. I mean, that's certainly what we're working to with our colleagues in the DfT. The third bit is around national highways and network rail. So some of the stuff that we've identified from the SIP is baked in, but there's some schemes, generally some of the larger schemes that we would see delivered in a sort of, 10, 15, 20 year horizon, that we need to work with them to carve out funding now. Again, this is around revenue funding, to develop the strategic cases to bring about some of the improvements that we seek. And then the final point is that we know the 45 billion that we've identified within the SIP isn't out of historical step with what the public purse has funded. You know, if you track back historically, we're not a million miles away over the 30-year period. But I think there is an opportunity, and again, in conversation with DfT colleagues, to seek out private funding for public infrastructure. And that becomes quite challenging because the private sector will want to know what the returns are in order to make the investment. But there are a number of models out there that we could potentially develop to reduce some of the pressure on the public purse. I think the majority of the SIP will still be funded through the public purse, but I think we have a job of work to do to demonstrate that there are models available that enable us to draw in private funding to release that pressure.
Thank you, Rupert. Dan.
Yeah, just on the point of the government funding for TFSE for this financial year, I just wanted to be really clear that the change in what was sort of originally indicated from the final settlement was nothing to do with any sort of lack of confidence or whatever it may be in TFSE. It was a decision ministers made across the board, applied to all of the subnational transport bodies, that given the financial constraints that the department of government was under, that budgets will be held at existing levels rather than increased, and reflected to a number of other areas across the department where areas were cut, and there was quite a lot, a lot of financial pressure in a lot of areas. So actually, we were pleased that some national transport bodies came out quite well out of that, with a sort of continued commitment to the funding, albeit without the increase that had initially been indicated. But certainly, that was a sort of a broad brush decision rather than anything specific to the work of TFSE, which, as we've previously discussed, still continues to add a lot of value. But I think it's important that everyone's aware of it.
Thank you for that, Dan. And it is really good to know that it's because of the general funding pot, so that's good. Hopefully we'll get an earlier indication, which again will be helpful. So we're asked, as Sarah said, to note the financial position for 23-24 to the end of September, and to agree the local contributions for 24-25. Are we happy to do that? No hands up. I'm just going to reflect on my chairmanship one more time and say hello to Councillor Peter Candlish, who's here and has been here all meetings, deputising for Gerald Vernon Jackson. Apologies for that. I've only just gone to the chat. We move on to agenda item 11, which is response to consultation. Again, Rupert, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So the board members will know that often our board meetings don't align with deadlines for consultations, and we agreed that where deadlines needed to be met, we would put up an officer response and make it clear that it's an officer response, and it would all be subject to endorsement by you as a board. So there's quite a few consultation responses there. I won't read through them all because you have them in your papers, but I'm really happy to take any questions that any of you may have on those consultation responses and to seek your agreement to the responses that have gone up.
Quite a simple request. Having read them all, is there anything anyone wants to add or comment on? No? So we're happy to endorse all of those. Not rushing you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
So, sorry, Chair. Can I ask a quick question? So
Daniel?
I confess I haven't read them all in verbatim. I've skimmed. Is there anything that we should be aware of that might jump out at those who are in a similar position to me, for which I apologise?
I don't think so, Daniel. I mean, things like the closure of ticket offices is quite emotive, and we put a response into that. And then the other one that has the potential to be quite challenging for communities is Gatwick. So that's the expansion of Gatwick Airport. We've registered as an interested party to the development consent order because of the surface transport implications that would potentially be incurred. We've made sure that, and we checked in with our colleagues in West Sussex who Gatwick sits within, and it's sort of in line with that. But I don't think there's anything that will would leap out at you and you'd go, crikey, I wasn't expecting that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Vince, you want to come in and then Mark?
Yeah, I was going to leave it, but the summary of the response to the Go Via Thameslink Railway one suggests it's more operators than the heading. I think we just need to be clear about whether it's one response for 4 operators or you've only responded to one of the consultations.
Rupert?
So on that, it is the response to those 4 operators who specifically have come out and asked us. Does that make sense?
It does.
I know the RDG has had a sort of overarching view, but it's particularly in relation to those 4.
I think I'd like to see the title and summary clarified then, because it doesn't quite say that in my view.
Okay.
Okay, we can do that. We can change that, Rupert. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the title is the response to GTR Southeast and GWR and Southwest Trains consultation. That's how it's gone in. But I take your point if it might not be clear enough in the paper.
Yeah, I don't think it says it like that in the paper at all.
Yep, no, that's fair enough.
Okay, we'll look into that. Mark, you had your hand up. Have you changed your mind? Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you. So we've agreed all of those with that point that's just been raised, or points that have just been raised. Thank you. So we then come to lead officer report, Rupert.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Again, I'm really happy to take the paper as read. Other than just noting the Transport Forum review, I mean, that's been quite I know we've gone through it, but it's quite a lot of work, and I'm particularly grateful for the team to putting that together. The other thing I would just add is the STB joint work, and this you're building upon what Dan touched upon a minute ago around that relationship with other STBs. Just to assure you that there is of the 7 STBs in England, there is a joint sort of technical steering group. There's also a chief officer group that meets frequently and regularly to ensure that we're not missing a trick in relation to other STBs. And you may well have noted, you did note, Chairman, that Andrew Summers, the Chief Executive of Transport East, has joined us today as an observer. And it's all part of the STB family. We talk about speaking with a single voice across our region. There is a role for the STBs across England speaking with a single voice to the department and to ministers on issues that are pressing for us as well.
Thank you. Questions, comments? None. So we note the activities of Transport for the South East between July and September 2023. So we come on to the SIP delivery, and Sarah, please.
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, I've not intended to go through the whole report. I think it's for information and take it as read. Just a couple of things I would highlight is that as of the end of last week, the delivery action plan and interactive story map are now live on our website. So please do go have a look and explore, and let us know any feedback you might have. Also to highlight that although we had a reduction in our budget, we have managed to find support for 4 of the schemes within our SIP for that really early stage development. Those are as one in Kent, one in Medway, one in Portsmouth and one in Southampton. So we'll be working with various scheme promoters there to help that bring across. We're also in the process of updating the delivery action plan with the latest position. This links into our monitoring and evaluation framework, so we can record, what progress we have made collectively in delivering the schemes within the SIP over the last year. And then lastly, regarding the analytical framework, this is another one of those areas where, whilst we are doing some work on our own behalf, we are also really working cross STB, particularly with Transport for the North. They are looking to roll out some of their analytical tools. We are, I would say, number one guinea pig, if you like. We're really pushing Transport for the North to roll things out to us, get through those barriers which we are finding around data sharing and legal agreements and what have you, but to really make it work and have access to those tools across the whole suite of STBs, really. So that's a really good thing. Then just lastly, just to highlight that I've been successful in recruiting to the last vacant position within my team, which is a very technical specialist role of an analysis manager. So in terms of our capability and capacity in that area, when Joshua Jow, who will be joining us from City Science, comes on board in the middle of December, that will really strengthen our position around the analytical framework.
Thank you, Sarah. Questions, comments? None. Take that as we're noting the progress of the range of work streams that will be support the delivery of the strategic investment plan. Thank you again. We come now to technical programme update, and Mark.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The slide and the following slide list out the items which are covered within this report, which is for information. So there are updates as per the report on the progress with the transport strategy refresh, development of the regional active travel strategy, development of the regional centre of excellence, an update on the work that we're currently undertaking on future mobility, the work that we're progressing on decarbonisation with the production of a tool to help local transport authorities answer the question that they may or may not be posed, depending on when the guidance comes out on quantifiable carbon reduction. The work that we're kind of currently progressing on our freight logistics and gateway strategy, and also on the electric vehicle infrastructure, electric vehicle charging infrastructure strategy. Happy to take the report as read, as unless members have any questions that they would like to ask about any of those areas of work.
Questions or comments? I think once again it just shows how much work's going on, and thank you all for that. We will agree to note all 7 of those areas of work as printed. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we now come to agenda item 15, which is communications and stakeholder engagement update. And Duncan, please.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you, Chair. Just to say hello to you, because I think it's the first time I've met all of you since taking up this role as the Communications and Public Affairs Manager at Transport for the South East. So nice to make your acquaintance. I'll take it as read that the report is as you find it. Just a couple of highlights for you. If I may, we continue with our communications and engagement plan as previously set out, supporting our technical work and also general raising of the awareness and ongoing raising of the awareness for transport for the South East from the technical perspective, covering decarb, bus back better, EV charging, future mobility and active travel. Inside the last 3 months, we've undertaken a refresh of our website and also included an accessibility statement as well. Going forward, we're looking at revamping the website in 2024 to make it a little bit more user-friendly in places. One of our big events this year, which I know many of you managed to attend, was our Connecting the South East conference that took place at the Amex Stadium in Brighton. We are really pleased to have Transport Minister Richard Holden there, who gave the keynote speech. He said some very positive things about not just the South East and its economic value, but also the role TFSE has in speaking as one voice to government. All of that was committed to videotape, which we've been using various opportunities on our social media platforms and indeed on our website as well. The event was a good success, got some media coverage with BBC Sussex, with Councillor Keith Glazier doing an interview, the Sussex World website, and also one of the journalists from Sussex World did an interview with the Transport Minister that went literally everywhere across the South East in terms of some of the challenges going forward. So we are really pleased with that particular event. Just a couple more bits. We've launched our brand new podcast. It's called the TFSE Podcast. It launched in September. It is hosted and presented by our apprentice, Tia Shelley. And the first episode that appeared in September featured Councillor Glazier and Rupert talking about us as an organisation and our plans. The current one for October talks all about electric vehicles and some of the challenges. And looking ahead to November's, it's going to look at the world of transport from a female perspective. That's the working title. I promise we can come up with something a little bit more catchier nearer the time. So the podcast is up and running, and you can find that on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and on our website as well. And our social media we've been building very much since Connecting the South East, because we have a lot of assets that we recorded on the day, and we've been promoting our podcasts using the social media platforms. So our engagement levels have gone up, as have our follower numbers, which are good. And finally, just from an engagement point of view, two key things. When I started a few months ago, we started our programme of MP engagement, going to invite conversations with various MPs across the South East. Those have started to happen. So far, we've done Ashford MP Damien Green, North Thanet MP Sir Roger Gell, and Portsmouth North MP Penny Mordaunt. In the pipeline, we have Gosport MP Caroline Dinage and Epsom and Ewell MP Chris Grayling. And next month, we have some Kent MPs as well. So the purpose of these virtual meetings tend to be Councillor Glazier and Rupert just going through a little bit of a reminder about who we are and what we're doing, but also some key interventions in the constituencies of those MPs we're talking to, just so there's a tremendous point of relevance. So that's the engagement side of things. And it was mentioned earlier, Councillor Humby, about Lucy Dixon-Thompson departing. We have a replacement. Her name is Jamie McSorley, and she'll be joining us in the middle of December, so she will be introduced accordingly nearer the time. I think that's everything, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Vince.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a personal thanks to Matt Jasper for a really speedy and excellent response in supporting South East of the Train Operating Company in their stakeholder conference in Canterbury on the 13th of November. So just a word of thanks for Matt.
Okay. Rob, Councillor Humby.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Really good to see the MP engagement plan. Always thought that we should have that and do it joined up. Just interested, I know I have been notified of where they are in my area. I couldn't actually make them at that time, so a heads up that it is really good how advanced that is. But also can be quite useful for us to know the other MPs, not just our own, because we quite often come across them in other areas, and keeping that sort of joined up approach and just being aware, even when we're talking to ours, that we know they're meeting these other MPs, it can just be quite useful sometimes. So if it's not possible, absolutely understand that. But if it is, just to let us all know when there's other, which you've effectively just done. So, but if we can have that sent by email, that'd be really useful. But otherwise, I think the plan is excellent. Yeah.
It is possible. I'll make a note of that and make sure that everyone's looped in going forward, regardless of where the MPs are. Thank you.
Thank you. Rupert.
Yeah, just a warning for board members that as we develop the podcast, we may wish to come to one of you or two of you to participate. It'd be great to get some of you on the podcast as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the trouble is, Rupert, with just you and Keith on there, you've probably just lost all our viewers now, mate. So it's going to be tricky to get that back.
It's funny you should say that. We've got a load of signed photos. If you want one, Rob, I'll send one over.
If we're having a competition, you'd probably win the mug, not the T-shirt. But I'm just saying, you know. I think it went very well, and thank you to Duncan and to Tia for that. It really did, in my opinion, work. So I know I'm slightly biased. Now, are we happy to agree that? As I come into AOB, I was just going to also pick up on what Rob said and what was just said there by Duncan about Lucy. And again, I just don't think anywhere's in the meeting we formally recorded our thanks to Lucy. I mean, she's been with us for an enormous amount of time, and presence will be missed. I'm sure we will get a good person back in, but a genuine thank you, I'm sure, from all of us for the work that she carried out over many years. So I just need to get it recorded somewhere, please. Thank you. So we come to AOB, and I know, Joy, I'll put two of your questions back. So would you like to start?
Yeah, of course, I'm more than happy to start. And my first one is around the Department of Transport Circular 122. And apologies, I'll probably read some of this. It published that particular circular back in December, and it guides National Highways' approach to planning for development. And it suggests that where development impacts sections of the strategic road network that are already operating over capacity, they're saying building additional highway capacity is no longer the default solution. Now, this change of approach will give greater emphasis on improving local roads to limit the amount of additional traffic on the SRN. But you know, this places then greater reliance on us as local transport authorities, who only receive a small share of the national transport budget, and certainly no certainty of funding, and we have less resources than national delivery bodies. I just wonder whether, you know, other LLTAs share our concerns and would consider writing to the DFT to seek a greater share of this transport budget as part of the multi-year settlement, so that we can plan effectively to deliver this development mitigation measures. And if that's the case, perhaps the TFSC could facilitate. And I'm, you know, I've got numbers of examples, but one of them would be the A27 around Chichester in particular. So, and that's just, you know, one of my examples, but I'm sure others have examples too.
Rupert?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm certainly aware of the Chichester local plan issues, Councillor Dennis, and I think it's all well and good having a sustainable development type policy if your SRN is fit for purpose in the first place. And the challenge you have along a number of the places along that corridor is that it's not fit for purpose, it's unreliable, and it is quite challenging. And I think the circular refers to the RIS process not being used to support local plan. But if your road or corridor has been identified for, frankly, decades as being quite challenging, then it does beg the question about whether that's right. And we would happily talk to colleagues in local transport authorities to understand if there are other issues elsewhere, and set those out to the department and hopefully find a way forward.
Thank you.
Peter.
Thanks, Councillor Glazer and Councillor Dennis. Just really to reiterate what Rupert said, I'd be happy to facilitate a session on this. I do know that National Highways are working closely with Chichester District Council on this. It's certainly not the intention to impact upon local plans in this way. But I think the best thing we can do, I'm certainly not an expert, so I don't want to get into a sort of big debate on it in this forum, but I think the best thing we can do is potentially arrange a forum. Maybe we can have a strategy working group or a separate forum when you can sort of come together, speak to our planning people, and maybe get NH in a room and just see what we can do to kind of work around this and find a better solution.
Thank you, Peter. I'm sure that's welcome. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I'm subbing for Councillor Maple today, who unfortunately couldn't make it, but it's just a plea to involve Medway in any other discussions that happen. We have similar issues that impact on our local plan with local motorway junction capacity. So yeah, we'd welcome kind of any joined up conversation that we can have.
Thank you. And apologies, Mark, I didn't know you were subbing. I don't know whether it comes from your end or whether we haven't picked it up, but welcome. Can we pick that up as a something that can be done in the near future, Rupert? Is that?
Yes, we'll look whether we might use a transport strategy working group to initiate that conversation and then pull in planning advice as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Joy, you have another one.
Yeah, and just say thank you to Mark for his comments as well. Yeah, I noticed he said they have problems with their motorway. We only have 3 miles of motorway, so we're very reliant on strategic road network, as you can hear, hence our frustrations. The second point was about the rail timetable proposed changes. So that's GTR looking at changes to their West Coastway timetable. And, you know, we can understand some of their issues. The changes they're putting are cost neutral. But there are a number of winners on the busy stations and losers on the quieter stations, which benefits those who live or travel around the larger towns and cities. But it means those who live in the rural areas or the less busy smaller towns are effectively the losers. And though we want to see the rail services improve and patronage return, we don't want this to be at the expense of the rural and peripheral communities, particularly those with pockets of deprivation. And again, I just wonder if any of the other local transport authorities share concerns, and again want to write to the DFT to seek an impact assessment and additional funding to ensure these communities are not left behind just because of their size and location.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to answer that. I'm not a rail expert. No one rushing forward, is it? I'm sure we can do something. What are we going to do, Rupert? We're going to.
Councillor Dennis, I haven't seen a consultation. Are you aware if there's a consultation out on it, or is it just a proposal at the moment?
It's a proposal of changes with yeah, there is a consultation out on it. I'm pretty sure there is. I'm pretty sure I've seen it. I've certainly seen the proposed changes anyway.
I mean, I think from a, I mean, this might be rather naughty of me, but I'm interested in Daniel and Vince's view on this. I know that in some European countries where footfall through particular stations has been relatively low, that stations have closed as a result of it. And I saw there's that balance between operating and maintaining a station in a rural area where you've got very low footfall against that sort of accessibility, isn't there? And so that rural communities aren't disadvantaged. And I suspect there's that bit of juggling.
This isn't just about this is not really about closing stations necessarily. This is actually about putting less trains on or less trains stopping at those stations.
Perhaps perhaps you could forward the consultation or a link.
Yeah, I'll get that done. I'll ask the officers to forward that on.
Thank you. We've got Daniel and Vince, but Daniel first.
The quick point of reassurance, I hope, in discussions on the RR board around the next control period for rail, there is definitely an element which talks about serving rural communities and not. And I'm choosing my words carefully because it is still in development. But there's been a move towards making sure that there is something in place to protect those communities that you're talking about, Councillor Dennis, and not cut costs because those places there isn't a business case for keeping a station there or serving them with trains. No, that's obviously not a commitment on my behalf or on the ORR's behalf, but it is something the RR board is focused on and trying to make sure is addressed in the appropriate way for those communities.
Thank you. Vince.
Yeah, I think this is probably a subject we're going to come back to a number of times, because operators are looking to change timetables. They're under financial pressures at the moment, and are trying to get the balance between getting value for money for taxpayer and delivering for passengers. I don't know the detail of the changes that you're discussing, Joe, but nor the date, because the date of their implementation is important. Because if they're for December 23, then they're already sort of cast, they're already done. If it's for December 24, then there's a long time period for changes to happen. So I think that probably a little bit more detail. And if you want to talk to me offline about it, because I do carry out independent reviews for Network Rail and timetable changes, etc. So I'd be more than happy to have a chat with you about it if you want to. But there is a balance to be played between what rail does well and what gives good value for the taxpayer.
Thank you, Vince. Any other comments? So you have an offer there from Vincent.
Yeah,
if you
thanks
could
very much.
Send the link, that would be really helpful. So we go into any other business. So it's hands up. If you've got anything else you want to add or discuss. No, looking good. Thank you very much. Again, I think a really good meeting. We are next due to meet on the 29th of January virtually. So if everybody's happy with what we've done today, I will close the meeting and look forward to seeing you in the new year. Don't forget that we are here between times, and any budding podcasters, please get in touch. I tell you, it's not as bad as it seems. It's really good. See you all very soon. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Well,
Thank you. Thanks all.
Cheerio.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.